The American culture is full of idioms. Not idiots, but we have those too. You know, idioms, pithy sayings that are supposed to reflect some sort of philosophy or worldview. Often we hear people say these things in response to conversation topics or plastered to the back of their cars on bumper stickers. Are you saying that coexist is a bad thing? While some of these sayings may have a rhythmic sound or rhyming words, some are couplets, some appear at first to interject what appears to be open-minded philosophy. I believe the Bible says you shall know them by their bumper stickers. And some are just simple statements regarding some political stance. Most of these sayings, however, are ridiculous, and when examined for their intellectual fortitude, they are often found wanting. One particular saying spreads like wildfire in this culture, but dies the same death as all the others once it's thoroughly examined. You may have heard someone say it before. I don't believe in organized religion. What this statement typically intends to communicate is someone's belief in the spiritual, but dislike for the traditional gathering of like-minded peoples in a systematic fashion. Images of the Catholic Mass fill the mind with its sitting and standing and its incantations in Latin. Or the Mormon service of shirts and ties and speakers void of doctrine but centered on subjective experience. Even the megachurch image with its stadiums of people with outstretched hands, laser light shows, and would-be rock bands fit into this category for some people. Granted, all three of the aforementioned churches worship a very different God, but we'll get to that later. Those who make this statement are trying to convince their audience that it's not the God-based belief system or the moral nature of religious teaching, but the organized way in which people gather together to share what is common to them. Where this statement or mindset fails is in its inconsistency within the daily lives of people. As we shall see, it's not the organized fashion of the worship service, it's the worship period. What I mean is, people don't have a problem with organization. What people have a problem with is elevating and honoring a perfect creator. For in this brand of worship, the person must admit their own depravity, their own imperfection, and their own inadequacies in contradiction to a culture that worships people, sexuality, and materialism. It's not the organized aspect of religion that's the problem. It's religion, period. Period. People have no problem worshiping themselves or their things. After all, the term worship comes from the root of where we get our word worthy and refers to that which is worthy of our time and attention. We spend all sorts of organized time on our bodies, our makeup, our sports teams, and our stuff. Girlfriends, science, trees, birds, plants. But when it comes time to honor the Creator God who made everything in the universe, all of a sudden we have a problem with organization. Here are some things to consider when someone who offers this nonsensical bumper sticker mentality in conversation or online. Is that to say that you have a preference for disorganized religion? So you must also reject grocery stores, government, law and order, families, education, money. What I mean is, culture and society are by their very nature organized. Even animals, birds, bears, and bees organize themselves into families, flocks, and flower finders. Flower finders? In order to more effectively navigate a world of trouble in the constant threat of survival. Take education, for example. Most of us are thrilled to live in a country where from a young age we can be taught the knowledge of the world. We will not be going into the education agenda in this blog, sorry. We sit in classrooms with organized rows of chairs, in rooms organized with whiteboards and organized screens. We follow organized schedules until we graduate with a sense of how to organize our own future. Granted, education is not perfect. It's made by man. While we can make changes and improvements, no one advocates the abolishment. No one says, I don't believe in organized education. What about economics? Do you also not believe in an organized economy? After all, our whole money system is finely tuned in a global system of equivalence, exchange rates, paper and coin, precious metals, investments, income, taxes, profit, and loss. Yet we would not want to give up our money, would we? Granted, our economic system is not perfect. It's made by man. While we can suggest different systems of capitalism, socialism, and even communism, did he just say communism? Niet! No one is honestly suggesting anarchy and chaos. No one ever says, I don't believe in an organized society. Heck no! So it's not the organized nature of the religion, it's the nature of the religion itself. And if that's the case, I would say, great, you must be a huge fan of Jesus, right? Jesus! See, around 2,000 years ago, a man named Jesus claimed to be the authentic son of the Creator God. The Creator God. And he spent most of his time rebuking the religious leaders of his time. In those days, the organized religion of the area was a form of Judaism that heavily emphasized a legalistic philosophy. Contrary to what most people know about religion, the pure form of the faith was buried by men called Pharisees, hypocrites. And they preferred that people follow the rules that they set forth rather than live by the philosophy that God gave them. Sound familiar? They forced people to live a certain way, and Jesus came to clarify the teachings of the Torah. He came to set the captives free from the bondage placed upon them by religious men. On one occasion, Jesus, who was a poor carpenter, nobody in the eyes of these Pharisees, stood up to these powerful and rich men and in public said, "Woe unto you, hypocrites! Hypocrites!" Because they required the people to live by rules that they themselves would not adhere to. You can find that in Matthew 23, verse 13. Does this sound familiar? On the contrary, Jesus taught that salvation, or heaven, if you will, is granted only to those who place their trust in him and reject the teaching of these men, including popes and prophets. Jesus taught that those who trust in him and what he taught would be clearly recognizable in the world by their simple obedience to the precept of 1, to love God, and to 2, love your fellow man as yourself. Love God, love your fellow man. So we get a lot of people in our culture claiming to be a follower of Jesus, but then they live these debaucherous lifestyles. And we know we can recognize a true believer by his adherence to those 2 simple principles. It's easy. It's simple as that. Now, the Pharisees didn't like this because it undermined their power among the people. They came to hate Jesus so intensely because of his teachings against religion, and they organized themselves to kill him. They not only sought for his death, they sought to have him crucified on the cross, a death so gruesome and so torturous that even the most notorious of all Romans, by virtue of his Roman citizenship, was spared this type of death. You could not be executed on the cross if you were a Roman citizen. It was a death so painful that the cross, or its root, crus, became the word by which today we define a pain so intense that it knocks you out, makes you totally unconscious. The word, excruciating. Sadly, churches today still have their Pharisees, okay? Churches today still have the religious leaders who plague the attendees with rules and traditions. And all this stuff is outside of what Jesus taught. Some churches still require papal authority, cardinals, gurus, prophets, stake presidents, bishops, sages. And sadly, none of these men have the authority to act on God's behalf. People like this exist in every church and in every country, and every body of believers will have men that are either too conservative or too liberal, too rigid or too loose, too loud, too quiet, and so forth. That was too much. There will always be people who don't think that you measure up to their definition of what a true believer should be. The issue then is not organized religion. It's about discovering who God really is and coming to a personal relationship with him through the person of Jesus Christ. See, God is too big and too perfect for any of us. We simply can't relate to that. You know, God is like a burning flame, and we are these dried up leaves. If we were to even come close to him, we'd burn up. And it's not because God's mean or he hates us. It's that his very nature opposes our very nature. He is perfect. We are imperfect. Jesus came to liberate us. He came to act as our mediator to free us from the false teachings of men who desire power over the people. Jesus was the ultimate rebel. The ultimate rebel. And we can come to know him the same way that we come to know an author of a book. You know, a person that we've never personally met physically, but who we've come to know by reading their works. You know, we do the same thing with actors, or we empathize with oppressed people that we see on TV. You know, and we feel because we have heard part of their story that we've come to know them personally, even though physically we've never met. Jesus works the same way. By reading his word, by reading the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, we can come to a personal relationship. We can come to know him. But the difference between Jesus and these actors and these television stars and these kids on TV is that Jesus talks back. The church is not a building. The church is a body of people who come to worship Jesus instead of their cars, instead of their sports teams, instead of their girlfriends, instead of their bodies, or the latest scientific journal, or outspoken cosmologist. You hear me, Stephen Hawkins? The question is then not whether or not you prefer organized religion. The question is, which organized religion are you participating in? Are you attending a church that honors God through Jesus Christ? Or are you attending a church that honors something else? A prophet, a scientist, an activist, a guru, or some other false god? False god. We all choose to follow somebody. Who do you follow? I'm reminded of what Joshua wrote in Joshua 24:15. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. Whether you serve the God of your forefathers that we served beyond the river, or the God of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. This is Owen Hemsath, The Apologetic. To hear more from Owen Hemsath, please find me on Facebook, YouTube, or WordPress. Just search for Owen Hemsath or The Apologetic.